Welcome to G Fun Facts Online. We've all heard the word psychopath. It conjures images from movies and true crime stories. The cold, calculating villain, devoid of all human emotion. But what if I told you that this isn't just a label for evil, but a description of a brain that is fundamentally different from the average person's? That the lack of empathy, the impulsivity, and the manipulative charm could be traced back to the very structure and wiring of the brain itself. Today, we're taking a deep dive into the cognitive neuroscience of psychopathy. We're going beyond the behavior to look at the biological architecture of a disordered mind, exploring what science can tell us about what makes a psychopath tick. So, what does a psychopath's brain actually look like? A growing mountain of research shows us that it's not just a matter of a bad attitude. There are consistent, measurable physical differences. These aren't random quirks either. They're concentrated in the very brain networks that govern what makes us human: our emotions, our decisions, and our ability to control our impulses. The central hub for this dysfunction appears to be a network called the paralimbic system. Think of this system as the brain's emotional switchboard, connecting emotion, motivation, and memory. And in individuals with psychopathy, this switchboard is riddled with faulty connections and underpowered components. Let's start with a key player, the amygdala. It's a tiny, almond-shaped structure deep in your brain, but it punches way above its weight. The amygdala is your fear processor. It's what makes your heart pound when you see a threat, and it's crucial for learning from scary or painful experiences. You touch a hot stove once, the amygdala helps burn that memory in, ensuring you don't do it again. In psychopaths, the amygdala is often smaller, and its activity is significantly blunted. When shown images that would make a typical person's amygdala light up with fear or distress, like a picture of a frightened face or a violent act, the psychopath's amygdala barely flickers. This is the neural root of their characteristic fearlessness. It's not that they're brave, it's that their brain's alarm system is broken. They fail to associate their actions with negative, painful consequences for others, or even for themselves, because the emotional learning center is offline. Next up is the prefrontal cortex, or PFC. This is the part of your brain right behind your forehead, and it's essentially the brain's CEO. It handles executive functions, planning for the future, making complex decisions, and stopping you from saying or doing something you'll later regret. Two areas within this CEO's office are particularly important here: the ventromedial prefrontal cortex, or VMPFC, and the orbitofrontal cortex, or OFC. The VMPFC is what integrates emotion into your decision-making. It's the part that gives you a gut feeling that a certain choice is a bad idea, even if it looks good on paper. The OFC helps you weigh the value of rewards and punishments. In psychopaths, both these areas often have less gray matter, that is, fewer brain cells, and show abnormal activity patterns. This dysfunction is a direct line to their terrible decision-making. They are impulsive, unable to delay gratification, and consistently fail to learn from punishment. In fact, their decision-making patterns are strikingly similar to patients who have physical injuries or lesions in their VMPFC. They understand the rules intellectually, but they lack the internal, emotional brake pedal that stops them from running the red light. Two other regions are worth mentioning. The anterior cingulate cortex, or ACC, acts as the brain's conflict monitor. It's what yells, "Whoops, you made a mistake," and helps you adjust your behavior. In psychopathy, an abnormal ACC means they don't get that internal error signal, so they keep making the same socially destructive choices. And then there's the insula. The insula is your center for interoception, the sense of your own body's internal state. It's what lets you feel your own heartbeat, your own hunger, and, crucially, it's deeply involved in empathy. The insula helps you feel what others are feeling. When you see someone in pain and you physically cringe, that's your insula at work, mirroring their experience. In psychopaths, when asked to imagine someone else in pain, their insula shows significantly reduced activity. The neural hardware for feeling another's suffering simply isn't engaging. So we have these individual brain regions that are structurally smaller or functionally less active. But the story gets even more complex. It's not just about faulty parts, it's about faulty wiring. Modern neuroscience has shown that the bigger problem might be the breakdown in communication between these critical brain regions. The connections, the white matter tracks that act as the brain's information highways, are compromised. Using a technique called diffusion tensor imaging, or DTI, which maps these highways, scientists have found reduced structural integrity in the connections between the amygdala and the ventromedial prefrontal cortex. This is a massive deal. It means the emotional signals from the fear center, the amygdala, are not getting through properly to the rational decision-making center, the PFC. Imagine a CEO who never gets reports from the security department about potential threats. They would continue to make risky, reckless decisions, completely unaware of the danger. That's what seems to be happening in the psychopathic brain. They can intellectually process that an action might harm someone, but the emotional stop signal from the amygdala never reaches the executive center to influence the final decision. This disconnection allows them to make cold, calculated choices that benefit them, without the emotional conflict or guilt that would paralyze a neurotypical person. Recent research has even identified distinct faulty networks for different aspects of the disorder. One faulty network, involving connections for social and reward processing, seems to be linked to their emotional deficits, like the lack of empathy. Another network, involving attention-related regions, is linked to their impulsivity and poor behavioral control. This suggests that psychopathy isn't a single problem, but a cascade of problems arising from multiple, distinct patterns of brain miswiring. Now, let's connect this brain science directly to the behaviors that define psychopathy. The consequences of this neurobiology are profound. First, as we've discussed, is the deficit in fear. This isn't just about being a thrill seeker. It's a fundamental inability to process and respond to threats. They show reduced sweating and heart rate changes in response to things that should be scary. They are notoriously bad at what's called aversive conditioning, learning to avoid things that lead to punishment. That broken amygdala is the culprit. But perhaps the most chilling consequence is the empathy void. Psychopaths have a profound inability to feel for others, especially when others are feeling fear or sadness. It's important to distinguish between two types of empathy here. There is cognitive empathy, which is the intellectual ability to understand someone else's perspective. And then there's affective empathy, which is the ability to feel what someone else is feeling. Psychopaths can often be very good at cognitive empathy. They can read people, understand their motivations and weaknesses, which makes them incredibly effective manipulators. But they lack affective empathy. They know you're in pain, but they don't feel it. Neuroimaging studies beautifully illustrate this. When a healthy person watches a video of someone getting a painful injection, their own pain-related brain regions, like the insula and ACC, light up as if they were feeling it themselves. This is called neural mirroring. In a psychopath's brain, this mirroring effect is weak or completely absent. The feeling part of empathy is neurologically missing. This leads us to their decision-making. It's defined by impulsivity, a laser focus on immediate rewards, and a shocking disregard for future consequences. This maps perfectly onto the dysfunctional prefrontal cortex. Their brain's reward system, particularly a region called the ventral striatum, is overactive, screaming, "I want it now." Meanwhile, the VMPFC, the part that should say, "Wait, let's think about the consequences," is too weak to regulate that impulse. In experiments like the ultimatum game, where a player has to accept or reject a proposed split of money, psychopaths are more likely to reject unfair offers, even if it means they get nothing. Their immediate emotional reaction to being slighted overrides the rational goal of maximizing their gain. But there's another layer to this, and it has to do with attention. The response modulation hypothesis suggests that psychopaths have a deficit in processing information that is outside their immediate focus of attention. Think of it as an extreme form of tunnel vision. When they are locked onto a goal, whether it's getting money, power, or some other reward, they may simply fail to process peripheral cues, like the look of fear on a victim's face or the long-term risk of getting caught. The emotional information is there, but their attentional spotlight is so narrow that it never gets processed. This isn't an excuse, but it's an explanation for how they can be so single-minded and seemingly oblivious to the immense harm they cause. So where does this all come from? Is a psychopath born or made? The evidence is increasingly pointing towards psychopathy being a neurodevelopmental disorder. The seeds are likely sown very early in life, through a complex interplay of genetic predispositions and environmental factors. We can see precursors in children. Children with high levels of what are called callous unemotional, or CU, traits, things like a lack of guilt, absence of empathy, and shallow emotions, show many of the same brain abnormalities seen in adult psychopaths, including a smaller, less reactive amygdala. This suggests a developmental trajectory, where an initial biological vulnerability can be shaped, for better or worse, by life experiences. A child with these vulnerabilities who grows up in a stable, nurturing environment might learn to manage their traits, while one who experiences adversity or trauma may be pushed further down the path toward full-blown psychopathy. This brings us to the final, critical question: can psychopathy be treated? The traditional view has been a pessimistic no. How do you treat someone who doesn't think there's anything wrong with them and has no motivation to change? But our growing neurobiological understanding is starting to challenge that. If we know the specific brain mechanisms that are failing, we can design more targeted interventions. For example, if the core issue is a low fear deficit tied to the amygdala, could we develop therapies that enhance their sensitivity to aversive cues? If the problem is attentional tunnel vision, could we use training programs to help them broaden their focus and process emotional information they currently ignore? Some newer approaches are showing glimmers of hope. One is the decompression model, used with juvenile offenders. It involves an intensive system of immediate and consistent positive reinforcement for any pro-social behavior. It basically tries to rewire their reward system to value positive actions. The results are preliminary but promising. The road to effective treatment is long and difficult, but for the first time, we have a map. By deconstructing the disordered mind of the psychopath, we move away from simplistic labels of monster or evil. We begin to see it for what it is, a profound and devastating neurobiological disorder. And with that understanding comes the hope that we can develop more effective strategies for prevention and treatment, ultimately reducing the immense suffering this condition causes for everyone. The human brain is the most complex object in the known universe, and psychopathy is a stark reminder of how subtle changes in its wiring can alter the very essence of human experience.